The Honda Hornet. It's just a name that people of a certain age, it means so much to, and I am one of those people. So I can't believe I'm one of the lucky ones who's getting on a plane later today to go and ride the new 2025 Honda CB1000 Hornet. That naked bike sector now is increasing in popularity all the time. You know, we've got super nakeds at the top of the food chain, 200 horsepower, massive tech, spec, and that's great. And we love those bikes. You know, there's definitely a place in the world for those. But it's fair to say that the turned down naked bike, you know, in the sort of 150 horsepower region is increasingly popular now, much more affordable, much more usable day to day. And so to see Honda joining in that party now in 2025 is great news. I just wanted to just sort of reflect a little bit on the whole Honda Hornet and CB, you know, sort of legacy really, because it goes back a long way. You go back to 1969 and Honda give the world the CB750, and in a stroke basically killed off the British bike industry and set the parameters for what we still consider today to be basically the basic design for a modern superbike. You know, the CB750 was the first four-cylinder production bike. It was the first bike that had disc brakes as standard. It was the first bike that had an electric start and offered more power than anything else at the time. So the CB badge is massively important, certainly to Honda. And, you know, those of us who like our motorcycle history, you know, I think, you know, recognise it as a key thing. Then the Hornet badge, you know, it's the late 90s, and Honda, and like everyone else, are selling motorbikes by container loads. They're flying out showrooms. And at the time, you know, the CBR 600F was a massive seller, massive, huge seller. And Honda took that bike and basically made a naked version of it with the same engine and same chassis, and called it the Hornet. And it too flew out the showrooms, and it offered a real good all-round package that experienced riders could enjoy, and was at the same time, you know, accessible for new riders. So it was a really important bike at the time. Fast forward a few more years into the early 2000s, 2002, and Honda thought, well, maybe we could go and bring out a bigger Hornet, and came out with the Hornet 900. And this never really sort of took off in the same way that the little one did, partly because I think the whole naked sector had moved on. We'd already got the 200, and the Super Duke, KTM Super Duke 990 was not far off either. And Honda came out with the Hornet 900 and used an old 919cc Fireblade engine in it. So it never really took off, and it got, you know, it got canned in 2007. So wind forward to 2013, and the Hornet 600 drew its last breath until 10 years later, last year, 2023, the CB750 Hornet came back. Now, Bruce has ridden that bike. I've never ridden it personally, but Bruce reports that it's a great, fun bike that he certainly was able to make go very fast when he rode it. And again, because of its nature and the engine and the flexibility from that parallel twin engine, has appealed really well to new riders as well as experienced riders. So that was good to see the Hornet name come back, albeit not in exactly the same formula, but delivering the same qualities and the same experience that the original Hornet did. So here we are on the cusp of the return of a big capacity Hornet. And what have Honda done with this one? Well, they've put in the engine from the 2017 Fireblade, 2017 to 2019 it was, which was a great engine at the time, and always a little bit behind in the superbike stakes in terms of power. So from Honda's point of view, to get it up to a modern spec in terms of emissions, so we're on Euro 5 plus now, that was a Euro 4 spec engine, they've chosen a really good platform, because by adapting it to cover the emissions now, it's now back to about 150 horsepower, which is bang on the money. And they've done that with narrower throttle bodies, softer cams, and easier timing. Are just a few of the tricks they've done, and they've cut 2,000 revs off the top. So it's a stroke of genius. It's a great engine. It's making 150 horsepower. But rather interestingly, what Honda have done with this new Hornet 1000 is they're bringing us two versions. They've got an SP version and a base model. Now the SP version's got a few horsepower more. They're claiming 154 horsepower, where the base model's in the late 140s. And apparently, according to all the blurb, that's done via a little flap in the exhaust system, kind of like an exit valve, I suppose. That on the SP is tuned differently than it is on the base model. And that's the only difference, as I understand it. So 154 horsepower. The SP gets Öhlins rear shock, TTX 36, Brembo Stylema brake calipers, and as I say, the extra horsepower. So it's got a few extra toys on it, but here's the thing. The SP version, Honda are saying, is going to be available for 9,999 on the road, less than 10 grand by a quid. And the base model is going to be 8,999 quid, which wherever you look in the world of motorcycling, especially in that sector, that naked bike sector, there is nothing that comes close. So you've got the Yamaha MT-10, which the base model is 14 grand and the one with the Öhlins is 16 grand. Granted, that bike's got a good bit more power than the Honda claiming for the Hornet, and a lot more tech, but it's in the ballpark. The Ducati V2, the new announced Ducati V2 Street Fighter, again, there's two specs on that. You go to the Öhlins one, and again, that'll have a lot more tech with it. That's coming in at 16 grand. If you look elsewhere in that sector, you get to the Suzuki GSX-S 1000, which is based on the obviously the GSX-R 1000 K5 engine detuned. That's a similar sort of horsepower, around about 150 horsepower, and a similar kind of level of spec. And that bike's 12 grand. So here's the Hornet placed at under 10 grand, with all those toys, and Honda may just have played an absolute blinder here. So I think the best thing for me to do at this point is to get on that plane and go and find out. So, by the magic of clever editing, you join me 24 hours later in the hills above lovely Benidorm, which, as you can see behind me, looks absolutely stunning. So we've had a day out today on the new Hornet 1000. We've been riding the SP, and I just want to jump straight in and not mess about and just go bravo Honda. Absolutely full marks to Honda. To get straight to the point, I think this is the most I've laughed on a Honda probably ever in all my years of riding motorbikes, and I include a lot of very competent and capable Hondas, but this one, in terms of hitting the brief that the Hornet kind of represents, that sort of fun, agility and accessibility kind of stuff, 100% nailed on done. So the route we've done today has been roughly about 150 k's in the hills up here, which has been epic. Billiard table smooth tarmac, so we've been able to really sort of throw it around in the corners without fear of smashing through potholes and stuff, and mostly sort of second and third gear stuff, which has been one of the great things about the day actually, as it's highlighted the wheelie ability about the bike, which is just, I think we must be getting in for sort of 3 digits, probably approaching on the wheelie count today. It's been absolutely epic. So I suppose I need to just dive in a bit deeper into my sort of impressions from the day, as I say, based on about 150k in the mountains around here. And right at the top of the list, the very, very first thing that just smacks you in the face when you hop on this bike is its agility. It's a combination of its geometry, which is quite a short wheelbase, quite aggressive steering, the riding position, which is not too aggressive actually, and it's quite spacious, but it certainly puts you in a position where you really can feel like you're in charge of the bike. And the rear tyre, curiously on this, for 1000cc, 150 odd horsepower naked bike, the Honda have gone with a 180 section tyre on the rear of this bike, which as is well documented is is a good trick for, you know, helping with agility. But that is by far the very first thing that grabs you when you get on this bike. And you know, I'm talking agility in the same bracket as, what am I thinking of? Probably the early Triumph Street Triple, sort of 675s, 765s. It's just like think and it goes. It's extraordinary, and yet it retains stability as well. So yeah, what it means is when you're riding, you can drop it into corners, it holds a line, it turns real fast, and it stands up and fires out without very little effort at all, in fact hardly any. And you know, we were riding around today, let's say second, third gear stuff, and on a couple of occasions the foot pegs would go down on this, but not very many occasions. They were kind of like when you're at a real big lean, carving through the corners. The next thing that really grabs you by the short and curlies is the engine. Obviously, we've already talked about the engine and its origins, so we're talking about a Fireblade engine that's been reworked. It's got cast pistons instead of forged pistons, which is where Honda have been able to save a few quid. But the engine is obviously detuned, so it's got tons and tons of mid-range, still 150 plus horsepower, which is more than you need. But they've also put shorter gear ratios in, gear 1 to 4, which is obviously where you live when you're road riding, are shorter than the Fireblades. So you have this combination of massive torque and real punchy gear ratios. So refreshingly as well, it's not just all about punch and torque. It does keep revving out, kind of like a Fireblade, kind of like a sports bike. It goes and goes and just keeps going and going and going and pulling really aggressively, really loud, massive induction roar. So we've got a big tick for agility, massive tick for the engine and how it responds, and the whole fuel injection setup as well, silky smooth. When you get into the tech, again, you know, it's an interesting one. This, you know, it'd be really easy to knock this bike for having pretty basic tech. There's no IMU on this bike, so its traction control system operates via wheel speed sensors front and rear, and obviously, you know, measuring the difference in speed between them two. And what that means is it's kind of like the original traction control setup, which is pretty crude. So when we first set off, I just sort of instinctively came across the first opportunity to pop a cheeky little wheelie, and you know, it was okay initially, but then obviously as the front wheel starts to slow down, the system just cut in really sharply and dropped the bike down quite hard, and then kind of didn't do anything. It just kind of sat there. And it waits until you shut the throttle fully, and then kind of everything sort of resets, and the whole process takes ages. And it really reminded me of those really early traction control systems from kind of, I don't know, when were they first seen on bikes? Probably 2010 on the BMW S1000RR. That's probably kind of reminiscent of that. And you know what? It'd be really easy to knock Honda for having a real crude system on this bike, but I'm okay with it because without wanting to jump to the end of this summary too soon, you know, the price on this bike is extraordinarily good value, and if the price to pay for that is a crude, no, crude's the wrong word, basic traction control system, then I'm okay with that. Of course, you can go in through the menus, which are not the most instinctive things to navigate your way through, but when you do eventually get into the rider modes, you can set a map and go in and switch the traction control off, which is fine. Then you're good to go. But every time you switch the ignition off and then back on, it defaults back to the TC being back on, which is again slightly annoying, but really I'm okay with it. It's not a criticism really at all. It's really just a point of note, and it's, I think, probably a consequence of the whole lack of IMU thing. One other thing to really touch on with the tech is within the menus. One of the things I started playing around with, I found a menu within the sort of functions, which was around the quick shifter, and you can adjust its cut time in the up operation and the down operation separately. So I ended up with a setup that was medium sensitivity for upshifts and what they call hard, which is obviously quite an aggressive shortcut time for back shifts, and it was right on the money. But that's a new one for me, where you can adjust a quick shifter's cut time. Well, not only just adjust the quick shifter's cut time, but also in the up direction and the down direction separately. So yeah, bravo Honda. Chassis and suspension. So the chassis on this is bespoke. It's not carried over from any other model. This is designed from day one and from the ground up to be a Hornet chassis. So it's designed with all the, I suppose, the headlines that I've been talking about already, like that agility and the steering and the fun aspect in mind. So it's a steel chassis, but it's a twin spar one. It's quite a cool looking thing, and it's the SP, as you know, it's got the Öhlins rear shocking and the adjustable suspension. I didn't touch it all day. It was bang on the money. It really, really was. It felt supportive. It didn't pump anywhere. It felt strong enough to take all the corner loading and some of the compressions that we were going through, but also it felt quite plush as well when we were going along on kind of longer, straighter bits of road. So very, very happy with the suspension. Brakes, again, it's another area. They've got the Stylema calipers on the SP, as we know, and it's a fairly basic master cylinder. And there's loads of power there, but there's not a great deal of feel. And it's just another area where Honda have saved a few quid. And again, I'm perfectly okay with that. I'm saying these things really just as a point to note, not a criticism. But there's so much power on these brakes, and it's so well supported by that front end geometry and the fork settings, which are bespoke to this bike, that you can really get a lot out of the brakes. You just lack a little bit of feel in the lever in your fingertips. So you know, it's a hell of a setup, and you just get confidence straight away. As soon as you get out the car park and 1 or 2 kilometres up the road, you go, yeah, I know this bike. We're going to have a good day, you and me, and boy, did we have a good day. We did a lot of naughty things. We did a lot of mundane things as well, peeling off the kilometres here and there, manoeuvring, U-turning and lay-bys when we were doing the pictures. It does it all, really, and it looks quite cool as well. So really kind of moving on to the summary of this, really, to try and sort of get to the point of where this bike's going to fit in. I suppose the big point, I mean, I've talked about some really, really positive things on this bike, and setting the whole price tag to one side, you know, they remain absolutely positive things. It is a brilliant, brilliant bike. But then the cherry on top is when you get to the price. 9,999 for the SP with all the bling and the extra little bit of horsepower, courtesy of the valve in the exhaust, which, by the way, you can't just take this exhaust and put on the base model and get the extra power. The valve on the exhaust that opens and closes at different RPM means that Honda are able to map the ECU's fuel maps and ignition maps differently, and that's where the power comes from. But 9,999 for the SP and 8,999 for the base model translates to, on a finance scheme which Honda are running at the moment, to £101 a month for the base model and 112 quid a month for this one. And the thing about that price point and that offer, you know, whichever direction you look in for comparisons on this bike, whether you go up the food chain into the super naked bracket, where you have your 200 horsepower bikes, fully loaded with weapons grade electronics, you know, they are more than double the price of this thing. And yeah, to put it bluntly, they're not worth twice as much as this thing. And then you look the other way for bikes at similar spec. So, you know, in that sort of normal naked class, let's call it, you know, you look at what Triumph have got, you look at what Kawasaki have got, you look at what Suzuki have got. And and when you get to bikes that have got similar spec, they are, you know, £2,000, £3,000, £4,000, £5,000 more than this. Kawasaki have got a new or an updated Z900 coming in the new year. We'll have a look at that. That's a similar price to the base model Hornet, but you know, it will be interesting to see how good that is in comparison with the updates. But the point really on that is, whichever direction you look for a competitor to this bike, you end up not finding one, which really kind of brings me to the point with this bike. I don't think it's an understatement to say that Honda, with this new Hornet 1000, have completely blown open the whole naked bike market, super naked and normal naked. It's in a class of one. It is extraordinarily good value, even if it was the same price as some of the bikes in its class with similar power and spec, it would be still a better bike. So what's going to be really interesting with this bike is to see how the market reacts to it, and crucially how its competitors, how Honda's competitors react to this bike. And really, you know, kind of that's really the sort of main summary point of this bike. What we've got here is a bike that is huge fun, huge fun. It's got a fabulous chassis, it's got fabulous suspension, brilliant engine, and it's all just married together perfectly. And the joy of having a bike from Honda that is fun, and I say that, it's almost kind of like damning praise, but you know, this is the first Honda I've been on for so long that's a fun bike, and it's great to see Honda appreciating that having fun is by far the most important thing when we ride motorcycles. So I doff my cap to you, Honda, and I wish you all the luck with this bike in the showroom.